Good morning, everybody. Thank you for asking me to speak to you. I was born in April 1937 in Budapest, Hungary, into a middle-class Jewish family. My grandfather and father were both directors in the insurance business, and my mother was a bookkeeper. I have no brothers or sisters. We lived a comfortable, peaceful and relatively safe life in a part of Budapest which was well known for the large number of Jewish families living there and had an active social life. Around 400,000 Jews lived in Hungary, of whom 200,000 lived in the capital, approximately 20% of the population of Budapest. Hungary is a small country in Eastern Europe with a total population of 10 million, compared with London, which has a population of around 8.5 million. Due to pressure from the popular far-right anti-Semitic fascist party, modelled on the Nazi party in Germany, the Hungarian government decided in 1939 to prohibit Jews from running their own companies. This was the first sign that the lives and movements of the Jews was becoming much more restricted. In 1941, Hungary entered the war, allied to Nazi Germany, and in a remarkably short time everything changed. By 1945, many anti-Jewish laws were passed by Parliament, which, for example, forbade marriage or sexual relationships between Jews and non-Jews, and excluded Jews from various professions, such as teachers, lawyers and journalists, and were prohibited from using trains or cars. From that time, life for the Hungarian Jewish population became more and more dangerous. More prominent anti-Semitism took hold. In 1943, forced labour camps for Jewish men were set up all over the country, and my father was taken to such a place. They had to undertake heavy physical labour and were given very little food. They were treated badly, some became ill, and many died. As a result, my mother, like many others in a similar situation, now had to look after me and our home on her own, just when I started school at the age of 6. In March 1944, the Germans occupied Hungary with the collaboration of the Hungarian government and marched into Budapest. On the 5th of April, the Yellow Star Order was given. This meant that all Jews had to wear a 6-pointed yellow star on their clothing as a mark of identification, and resulted in constant abuse and even beatings by members of the far-right Hungarian Nazi Party. On the 15th of June 1944, we were ordered to leave our home and had to move into a designated Yellow Star block of flats, leaving our flat to a non-Jewish neighbour, hoping that he would ensure that no stranger was going to be ordered to move in. This was just one way of confiscating Jewish property. I was 7 years old. These blocks of flats were identifiable by a yellow star on the front entrance. We were only allowed out for a maximum of 2 hours a day, which was spent mainly in queuing for basic items of food. We were not allowed to buy such items as butter, rice or eggs. There was no medical care available, and by this time Jewish bank accounts were also frozen. We were no longer allowed to visit parks or cinemas or restaurants. This was when the German commander Adolf Eichmann, stationed in Budapest, ordered confiscation of all Jewish properties, such as shops and factories, and immediately thereafter the deportation of all the Jews began. In October 1944, after the roundup of Jewish men had been accomplished, it was the turn of the women. The far-right Hungarian Eurocross party, working with the Germans, was going from block to block, searching every flat, herding together all the Jewish women and children in the courtyard, giving them just a few minutes to say goodbye before they were taken away. And on the 13th of October, this included my mother. My aunt, who was staying with us, grabbed me and rushed me across the corridor, begging a non-Jewish neighbour friend to hide us in a cupboard. Fortunately, he agreed, though his life would have been in great danger had we been discovered. This is one day I shall always remember. During this time, my uncle and his family were in hiding somewhere else in Budapest. Looking back, who would have thought that I would live through German occupation, be persecuted for being a Jew, hide in the cupboard of a non-Jewish family, which unquestionably saved my life, while my mother was taken away to a concentration camp, that after hiding in an abandoned flat for some time, due to more stringent searches, my aunt and I would be forced to go and live in the ghetto in the most inhuman conditions. The ghetto was a designated closed area set aside for Jews only, all non-Jews having been moved out. It was surrounded by a wall. The small number of gates were guarded by the army. Those Jews who were not taken to concentration camps were forced into about 290 buildings, where at least 20 people lived in each overcrowded flat and had to survive on very little food, such as horse meat and bread and dripping. Water had to be brought up in buckets, there was no medicine, there were no cleaning materials, and no rubbish or waste was collected. Dead bodies lay piled up on the pavement, many of whom had died of starvation or diseases. It was not advisable to go outside. At the same time, the buildings were under constant bombardment by the Soviet Air Force, and we often had to hide in the cellar. In fact, at one point, part of our building was hit and collapsed. By this time, the advancing Soviet troops had surrounded Budapest and were on the point of entering the capital. On the 17th of January 1945, these troops arrived and freed us just minutes before the ghetto was about to be blown up by the retreating Germans. They found around 3,000 bodies. The siege of Budapest lasted 100 days and the town was in ruins. And this is another day I shall always remember. My aunt and I left in a dazed condition and entered a world we hardly recognized. All the bridges had been blown up, most of the houses were damaged or on fire or simply demolished. We found out from a surviving friend that my father and my uncle had escaped to neighboring Romania, where both Romanian and Hungarian was spoken, which had been freed by the Soviets weeks before Hungary was liberated. We had no choice but to follow them there, as we had lost everything. My mother told me later that when she was taken away, she was forced to march around 30 kilometers a day, sleeping on the ground in the snow and given hardly anything to eat. Eventually they arrived at Mauthausen, which was one of the major concentration camps set up by the Germans in Austria. Miraculously, she survived in unheated barracks with hardly any food or water in a camp infested by lice. She sustained several beatings, her ribs were broken, her teeth were smashed, she suffered from dehydration and never fully recovered physically or mentally. She was freed by the American Army on the 4th of May 1945, being one of only 5,000 survivors out of a total of 16,000. She was taken to a hospital and after recovering was able to return to Budapest. She went to our original home, but the current occupant refused to let her in or give her back any of our belongings. It took her some time to find out from a friend that my aunt and I, together with my father and uncle, were in Romania, so she had no choice but to follow us there. Her incredible return from the dead was a huge surprise and a source of great happiness to us all. But it also created great confusion, especially for my father, who believed that my mother had perished and had started a new relationship with another lady. When my mother found out what happened, she felt that she had no choice but to take me away and return to Budapest and divorce my father. So in August 1945 we had to start again. My mother managed to find a small bedroom flat, found work as a carer, and I went back to school. By this time, the People's Democratic regime had been established in Hungary. This was in fact a communist dictatorship controlled by the Soviets. Everything, including the newspapers and the radio, was controlled by the party. There were spies everywhere, watching and listening, and people who said anything against the party suddenly disappeared. In school, we were spied upon and had no choice but to learn Russian. Life was hard. We had very little money and had to survive on basic simple food, which was monotonous and unhealthy. There were no fridges or washing machines. We had to purchase and carry blocks of ice from the market. We had an ice box in the kitchen. Wood and coal for the stove were stored in the cellar. I could not go to university as I was from a middle-class background and was of course Jewish, as this was still a black mark under the Soviets. Not having a choice, I ended up going to the Highways and Railways Technical College only because we knew one of the teachers. It certainly was not what I wanted to do. This way of living could not go on much longer. People were fed up and were looking to find a way out. By October 1956, the Hungarian students had had enough. They gathered on the streets, made speeches and marched to the Hungarian Broadcasting House. They presented a 16-point manifesto asking for the formation of an independent Hungary and free elections. This was the main reason for the subsequent uprising and the initial victory of the people on the 23rd of October 1956, followed by the brutal revenge of the Soviet army only a few days later. On the 25th of October, I was among 200,000 people who gathered in front of the Parliament building to celebrate a new beginning. The Soviet troops were, of course, aware of this. They approached the square and started shooting at people, miraculously, just a few minutes after I left. I found out later that over 300 demonstrators were gunned down. Pieces of clothing, shoes and pools of blood were still seen everywhere on the square. This became known as the Bloody Thursday. And this is yet another day I shall always remember. The fighting continued, but by the morning of the 4th of November, the Soviet troops were in control. Over 2,500 Hungarians were killed and thousands fled the country. The city was in ruins yet again. By now we heard that many Hungarians were escaping to Austria. After talking to my father and my aunt, I took the decision with my mother and a friend that we had no future in Hungary, and the only answer was to escape to find a better life. Who would have thought that I would live through the Hungarian Revolution in October 1956, and that I would escape with my mother from living under a barbaric communist regime, with nothing but a small bag of food and my teddy, which I still have here with me. I will never forget the journey to the border on the 21st of November, in the middle of a very cold winter, through the night, crawling through mud, over canals, avoiding tanks, searchlights, minefields and border guards. I was lucky. Many others did not make it and were either captured or simply shot. Miraculously, I crossed the border into Austria at 2:30 a.m. after walking about 25 miles. I, with many others, were welcomed by volunteers with hot drinks and food and shelter for the night. Another day I shall always remember. Next morning, I was taken by train to a refugee camp near Innsbruck and had to rely on complete strangers to give me shelter, clothing and food. After having arranged to be transferred to Vienna in January, I queued outside the British Embassy for days and managed to get one of the last permits to emigrate to England. We were given 2 hours to get to the railway station and take the train to Ostend in Belgium, and from there the boat to Dover. On arrival in Dover on the 6th of February 1957, we were taken by train to Cannock Chase in the north of England and were housed in barracks in a disused army camp. After a few weeks, I was moved to an old stately home near East Grinstead, where at last I could recover, but I knew that the next step had to be to go to London to start a new life. Who would have thought that arriving in this country in February 1957, aged 20, with nothing, knowing nobody, speaking very little English, I would be accepted and helped to start a new life by various organizations, learn new customs, try to assimilate as quickly as possible, go to school again and study in a language I was not fluent in and pass exams in English and still end up near the top of the class. Having finished school in 1959, I had to find employment and try to progress in difficult circumstances, and at the same time find somewhere to live. I decided to try my luck in the hotel business, and who would have dreamt that it was possible to achieve so much by working all hours of the day and night. Eventually, after many years in various jobs in several hotels, including porter, kitchen help, waiter, receptionist, and in the sales office, I became director of international sales for one of the largest hotel companies in the country. I was in control of several overseas offices and the sales team. I made over 160 sales trips traveling around the world, arranging for many thousands of overseas visitors to come to England and help to increase tourism into this country. At the same time, I was appointed acting chair of the London Tourist Board, chairman of the Hotel Sales Managers Association, and received the British Tourist Authority's campaign medal for services to the incoming tourism industry. Who would have thought that I would settle down here in London, marry in 1972, and have a lovely family with 2 children and 4 grandchildren? I am proud of my contribution to our society as a magistrate in the adult, youth and licensing courts for many years, and being chair for the last 21 years of one of the largest residents' associations in London. Also in my area, my story has been included in a virtual story wall as a hero for my contribution to life in the borough. I am proud of my work with the Metropolitan Police, having chaired the local Safer Neighbourhood Ward panel for 10 years, from 2006 when it was set up, and chaired the Independent Advisory Group for 4 years, from 2007, as their first independent chair, advising 8 different borough commanders and superintendents on local issues, for which in 2010 I received an award as the most outstanding volunteer within the criminal justice system in Haringey, and in 2019 a Metropolitan Police Commendation for commitment and professionalism presented by the Borough Commander. I'm also very proud to be able to tell you that I was recognised by Her Majesty the Queen with the award of MBE in the 2020 New Year Honours for services to Holocaust education and commemoration. And who would have thought that I would be here talking to you over 65 years after surviving the Nazi terror, the Soviet regime, and escaping from Hungary, to tell you that with lots of hard work, perseverance, optimism and determination, I did it, I succeeded. Thank you. Well, first of all, as far as my life story is concerned, let's look at some of the ordinary people I come across with. And the first and most important person to mention is the neighbour, the non-Jewish neighbour, who decided to hide us in his flat, in his cupboard. We were not very friendly, we were simply saying hello to each other on the corridors. So you can't say that he did it simply because he knew us that well, but he felt that he had no choice but to help us. And that I shall always remember. It's a great shame that I do not remember his name and I could never go back and thank him. Ordinary people, for example, when I escaped from Hungary, the people at the border who helped us simply because they felt that they needed to give us some future, the people who gave us tea, coffee and clothing, and the same ordinary people in Austria who looked after us and again managed to integrate us into their lives just to help us. And again, at the British Embassy, the people who helped us in giving us permits to come to this country. These were all ordinary people who felt compelled to help the refugees in order to start a new life.
Today is Holocaust Remembrance Day, a day to remember those who experienced horrors during World War II. This year's theme is ordinary people, which in my opinion is extremely important, as the stories we read about the Holocaust sometimes make it hard for us to remember that they were just ordinary people. Anne Frank, Eva Schloss, Leo Sokolov, all these people just like us. They had good days, bad days, interests and fears, before their lives took a horrific turn. These people are known for incredible things and deserve to be commemorated. But what about all the others, those whose lives were cut short? There was an estimate of 6 million Jews persecuted in the Holocaust. That in itself is just a number, but behind each digit is a name with a family, with a life, with a future. There was hundreds of books on the Holocaust, but the thing I found most incredible yet daunting are those in the background, those who showed bravery that was never really commemorated. I'd like to share this story with you because it shows how many ordinary people we lost, people who could have done wonders. Rachel Sales Church was born on March 4th, 1917 in Poland. Rachel was the 8th child born to Hasidic Jewish parents. Her family spoke English, Hebrew, and German, in addition to Yiddish and Polish. As a child, she had an amazing voice that would often lead to her getting main roles in the school plays, despite the fact that Jewish children did not often get lead roles. In 1939, Rachel's boyfriend obtained a visa to immigrate to America. After a small engagement ceremony, Rachel's boyfriend left for America. Rachel was never able to go to America, and that was the last time Rachel ever saw her fiancé. In 1941, the Germans established a Jewish ghetto in Karlsruhe. Rachel was lucky enough to get a job as a secretary, working for a German ghetto official. Yet in 1942, all Jews in Karlsruhe were transferred to a larger ghetto, where Rachel was offered her job back, which she bravely refused unless her family was spared from deportation and guaranteed safety. In 1942, Rachel, her mother, and her 4 sisters, along with her husband and children, were all deported to Belzec Killing Center, where they all sadly perished. We tell stories like Rachel's for a reason, so that we'll never forget what hatred can do. So ordinary people, like you and me, can learn from these tragedies and make sure they never happen again.
I want to thank the Bristol Holocaust Memorial Day Steering Group for once again creating space for us as a city to honour the memory of those killed in the Holocaust. Holocaust Memorial Day 2023 marks the 78th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau by Ukrainian forces. Over 6 million Jews were killed by Nazi anti-Semitism. Roma and Sinti people, black people, Slavic people, LGBT people, disabled people, trade unionists and political opponents were all also persecuted and murdered by that regime and its collaborators. And, as we have heard from survivors of the Holocaust and subsequent genocides in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia and Darfur, these horrors have stayed with them. We must never forget and never again see repeated such crimes against humanity. And so City Hall recently hosted an educational conference for secondary school students, hearing from a Holocaust survivor, thanks to a local ambassador from the Holocaust Educational Trust. This year's theme of ordinary people has prompted me to reflect on the transformative power that each and every one of us can have in standing up to prejudice and hate. As a proud city of sanctuary, this isn't just in helping people to find housing and food, vital though that is. It's about helping people find community, support and purpose in a new place. And it's about challenging the hostility that they all face too often. I hope that today, as we mourn and reflect, we can also be inspired as ordinary people to commit to challenge and oppose hatred and oppression wherever we encounter it.
It's so very important that we take time to remember World Holocaust Memorial Day. And this year, the theme being ordinary people, it is especially apt that we, ordinary people, take time to do that. I'd like to share with you a quote from Primo Levi, who said, "Monsters exist, but they are too few in number to be truly dangerous. More dangerous are the common men, the functionaries, ready to believe and to act without asking questions." So it is a time for us to remind ourselves that we, the ordinary people, must always look to the world around us, ask questions, act to save people who are in peril. And we see across the world, from China to Ukraine, to the small boats crossing the oceans, that there are people in peril who need our support. Thank you.
On this Holocaust Memorial Day, we remember all those people who lost their lives in the Holocaust and their families, and those who lost their lives in genocides across the world, in Rwanda, Cambodia, Darfur and Bosnia. The theme this year is ordinary people, reminding us that we must all stand up to prejudice and hate wherever we see it. I'm proud to be one of the MPs here in Bristol, a city of sanctuary that has always welcomed refugees from such atrocities across the world.
It's my privilege to share with you on this Holocaust Memorial Day this short act of remembrance. And I do so from here in St. Nicholas of Tolentino Church, long associated with support of holding the memory of the Holocaust dear. And we begin by lighting the 7-branch candle, a menorah candlestick, for 6 million Jews exterminated in death camps, and another million Jews exterminated by death squads roaming around Eastern Europe. And that's in addition to another million of all those who opposed the regime. And so we remember. Words spoken at the Bristol Orthodox Synagogue in 2014 by a speaker there. In some aspects, the Holocaust is a unique event. Never before and never since had the extermination of a whole ancient people been made a central policy of government. Never before had whole communities, whole sections of the population, religious minorities, ethnic minorities, social minorities, the disabled, the dissidents, all all been loaded together into an industrial process of annihilation. Never before had all the facilities of a world power been dedicated to such industrialized destruction of civilian populations. It was particularly vast and well organized. And so we remember. Words of Hugo Grimm, a survivor. I keep seeing my brother and my grandparents in the selection line in Auschwitz. There's so many aunts and uncles, cousins and friends, and neighbours indeed. Most of the Jewish community of my hometown, slowly, unknowingly, walking to their deaths. I think of all the love and laughter and learning that was extinguished in their lives. I think of the homes they might have built, the illnesses they might have cured, and how civilization could have been strengthened. When the world saw and understood what unspeakable atrocities had been committed, I was sure that never again would there be any anti-Semitism or race hatreds of any kind. And nothing would ever again erode the divine image imprinted on every human being and the dignity of individual women and men. The sad truth is that tyranny and race hatred did not end when the Second World War ended. Time is short, the task is urgent, evil is real, and so is good. There is a choice. And we are not so much chosen as choosers. Life is holy, all life, mine and yours, and that of those who came before us, and the life of those after us. And so we remember. In the words of President Obama at Buchenwald, to this day, there are those who perpetuate every form of intolerance, racism, anti-Semitism, homophobia, xenophobia, sexism, and more. Hatred that degrades its victims and diminishes us all. In this century, we've seen genocide. We've seen mass graves and the ashes of villages burnt to the ground, children used as soldiers and rape used as weapons of war. This place teaches us that we must be ever vigilant about the spread of evil in our own time, that we must reject the false comfort that others' suffering is not our problem, and instead commit ourselves to resisting those who would subjugate others to serve their own interests. And so we remember. And in remembrance of the Holocaust and its millions of victims, in remembrance of other genocides in the last more than 100 years, we light the Holocaust Memorial Day candle. And may this candle that burns burn into our own hearts a yearning and a desire to build a different world. A world when we will eradicate every form of discrimination, every form of hatred, and and so build a world of humanity. So we remember those who died and continue to do so in dark cells and concentration camps, prisoners of conscience, witnesses to faith, courageous prophets who disturb the powers that be. So we remember our Jewish brothers and sisters whom Christians have treated so ill for so long. We remember their 6 million who died in the Holocaust in Germany and Poland, and those others who died with them. Jehovah's Witnesses, homosexual people, gypsies, and all whose way of life and words challenge the claim of the purity of the race. Let us remember. And so we remember those who died when madness ruled the world and evil dwelt on earth, those we knew and those whose very name is lost. Because of their deaths, may we renew our struggle against cruelty and injustice, against prejudice, tyranny and oppression. Still we cry out in the name of humanity, out of the darkness of our divided world. Let not the hope of men and women perish. Let not new clouds rain death down upon the earth. Turn all the hearts and wills of rulers and peoples to build a new world where men and women live as friends in the bond of your peace. So we remember and commit ourselves to never forgetting.